Welcome to Moments with Marianne. Allow me to interrupt your train of thought with something that may be one of the most interesting things you'll hear today. This is Marianne Pastana, and we're here today with special guest, Shamini Jain, and she's here to share with us her new book, Healing Ourselves, Biofield Science and the Future of Health. Now, Dr. Shamini Jain is a psychologist, neuroscientist, and social entrepreneur. She's the founder and CEO of the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, otherwise known as CHI, which is a collaborative accelerator that connects scientists, health practitioners, educators, and artists to help lead humanity to heal ourselves. Her pioneering research in meditation, biofield healing, and psychoneuroimmunology has been featured in Time, U.S. News and World Report, and CNN. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. Shamini Jain.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here.
And what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. I got to tell you, I got the book, then I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to get the audiobook. And I can see why people are just falling in love with this. And congratulations, by the way, on your Nautilus Award.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a big honor. I'm real excited about that and excited for the positive feedback on the book.
Yeah. Why don't we start, I guess, from the beginning and what inspired you to even follow the path that you are on? Because, you're a scientist. You've got all these great, these titles that you've really worked hard for. So what made you go in that direction?
Honestly, Marianne, I think part of it was just the proclivity of a scientist to be curious, and being the daughter of a scientist growing up of East Indian descent. My parents emigrated to the United States in South Carolina almost 60 years ago. And I grew up in the East Indian tradition of Jainism, which is a small religion. Some might even regard it as a philosophy. So I learned about spirituality from the Jain tradition, but I was also surrounded growing up in South Carolina by my friends who were Baptist Christians. And so I recognized right away that we thought differently about, how we described God or the divine or the soul, but yet there was this commonality in understanding how powerful the human spirit could be. And then I think, like most students in the United States, I went to school and realized we didn't talk about any of this at all. And yet these books that I was reading from our traditions, including, books that were interpreting the Upanishads and other, sacred texts from thousands of years ago in the Vedic traditions, described how powerful our spirit was for healing ourselves. And, even simple things like what we would consider simple now, like yoga and pranayama practice, breathing exercises, and how those would impact the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system, these aspects of our nervous system. So I remember reading that stuff when I was like 8, 9, 10 years old. And I would think, how do they know that? I was very skeptical, actually. And I thought, well, why aren't we talking about this in school? And, they're making all these claims about things like yoga, but how do we know that's really legitimate? So as I had the privilege of attending some of the finest universities in the US, I began to ask these questions, and I found myself in the area of cognitive neuroscience at Columbia University when I was an undergraduate. And just to give folks some context of how much things have evolved, I was there in the early 90s. And back then they were telling us that the brain didn't change after age 7. And I remember being a young undergraduate thinking that just doesn't sound right. And I wondered, what kind of data did they have to make that claim? There wasn't a lot of data, but that was the point. Science continues to evolve. And many of the things that we said about the brain, a couple of decades ago, we found are just simply not true or incomplete. So it was really just that journey of curiosity and recognizing that our knowledge base is continually evolving in science. That's the beauty of science, that I began to wonder, what could we take from these ancient traditions of spirituality and medicine, like Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, Tibetan medicine, native medicine, and others, where their medicines were deeply rooted in a cosmology of connection that didn't exclude the spirit. So how could we begin to include it in our study of healing? Anyway, I'm sorry, this is a kind of a long-winded answer, but that is how I found my way to a discipline called psychoneuroimmunology, which is where I got my PhD. And that was the focus of my research. And it's a really, psychoneuroimmunology sounds so fancy and important, but all it really is exploring the connection of the mind and the body and learning how to use certain tools and research, like measuring changes in the immune system or the hormone system and how they relate to our emotions, our mindset, and even our spirit. So once I found psychoneuroimmunology, I realized this is a more systematic way of looking at the whole person. And I bet we could use these tools to study things like energy healing, spiritual healing, these time honored traditions that have been around where people are anecdotally making lots of claims about their pain being reduced, their mental well being being enhanced, even their immune systems being enhanced. So I said, let's start using these tools to start exploring these practices and what they could mean for our health and healing on a global level.
Well, I'm so glad you went through that because it makes sense when you look at how, I mean, just this curiosity you've had has really kind of been the driving force into asking these questions. And yeah, I remember when they were talking about, the brain doesn't regenerate, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that. I remember hearing about that. And, I think even back then I was like, well, that's kind of odd,
Yeah. I mean, anyone who's had lived experience, right, and some self-reflection knows that some of the claims that are sometimes made by science don't fit our experience. And that's fine. I mean, not all of them do. I mean, we do science for a reason. We do it to replicate, we do it to really investigate. And yet, we all have to remember, and I think the pandemic has taught us this quite well, our methods of investigation, as well as what we find out, are continually evolving. I mean, another example is, we now know that there are lymphatic microvessels in the brain. 60 years ago, we didn't even think the immune system was connected to the brain. Now there are Nature papers, which, Nature is one of the top scientific journals of the world, showing how there are actually lymphatic microvessels in the brain, that the immune system is very much present in the brain. Not only does it connect in peripherally in many ways. So, 60 years ago, we thought that was impossible. And as you know, Marianne, a lot of the focus of the book and our work at my nonprofit, the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, is exploring this next frontier, an area that we call Biofield Science, which are studying the fields of energy and information that guide our health. Some of those are measurable, like EEGs and EKGs. We've learned that we can even input certain types of electromagnetic energy into the body to stimulate a healing response. But it also includes these subtle aspects of energy, of biofield, which have been called prana, chi, many different terms, used in acupuncture, all kinds of different forms of indigenous medicine, including Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, and others. And of course, are really central to the understanding of practitioners who practice things like energy and spiritual healing. And what we're finding from that data in biofield science is really tremendous. And as you know, I detail a lot of that in my book, as well as placebo, mind body practices. But we're learning that our energy, whether directly measurable or not, has a profound effect on our healing process. And that when we connect through the biofield, it's so powerful. It's really, just as we may have thought that we were separated from each other, I think the pandemic has taught us how much we can actually feel each other. And the biofield research is showing us not only can we feel each other, we can heal each other, even across distances. And that's incredibly profound, exciting, and for me brings great hope.
I think it brings a lot of people great hope, especially, I can remember back in the day, Dr. Emoto was doing that testing on water, with prayer and affirmations. And you look at that and it's like, okay, well, we're 70% water. So I could see that that would affect us the same way.
Absolutely. There's so much wonderful research being done on water. There was some great research recently done by the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where they explored the impact of extraordinary healers on pain. And one of the interesting things they did was actually have the healing practitioners wear a vial of water, and then they analyzed that water. And they actually found that the structure of the water shifted when healing practitioners were engaged in giving a healing. So there's so much to explore. I think your ideas here are spot on. We're 70% water. If we know that we can actually measure changes in the structure of water during healing practice, what's happening to the water in our bodies when we're engaging in self-healing practices?
All very intriguing questions, and you talk about a lot of those in your book. Well, and it's interesting because to kind of touch on, I mean, you talked about how, they thought that all these different processes, our brain, our hormones, our nervous system, they're all separate. So what's that missing link? What have we been missing there?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because the founding fathers of psychoneuroimmunology, one of them was Bob Ader. And he has a beautiful quote, which I think I put in my book. And essentially what he said was, disciplinary boundaries and the structures they create are actually fictions, meaning that we create these concepts of things like the immune system, the hormonal system, and we put all these things in boxes, and we've been taught to think that those are separate because it's more convenient for us as scientists to just focus on one thing. Doctors tend to specialize in a certain area. We study the heart or we study the brain, but the problem has been that we don't engage enough in multidisciplinary discussions and learning. So surely it makes sense that we want to specialize as doctors maybe in a particular organ system, but that doesn't mean that that organ system doesn't talk to another. And so this is where it's important to get doctors together with PhD scientists who are studying different areas of how the mind-body system work. And of course, that was what led to the discipline of psychoneuroimmunology. When they brought this discipline together 60 years ago, even though everybody thought they were crazy because there couldn't be any connection between the brain and the immune system, how did they find things out? Well, they brought scientists together that were studying the immune system, the hormone system, the brain. They also brought together doctors who were witnessing these changes in their patients and recognizing that there seemed to be patterns, for example, of certain patients who had chronic pain or some immune issue and, psychological problems that they were having at the time. So by bringing these diverse people together, practitioners and scientists, they were able to uncover these interconnections or patterns, which led to the field of psychoneuroimmunology. In the same way, we're doing the same with biofields, the study of energy and information that guide our health. So we know of scientists who are doing work where they're actually putting in energy across cell membranes of cells and growing new neural tissue. And I'm going to repeat that. What they're doing is they're putting energy into cell membranes of certain types of stem cells, for example. And by doing that, not by putting in chemicals or anything like that, but just by putting in known amounts of energy, they can actually stimulate those cells to differentiate into neural cells. Now, that's pretty profound. That's one example of biofield science. But we have other people that are looking at, for example, the human-earth connection. There are a number of studies, I'm sure many of your listeners might know, on grounding, where many different scientists at this point have looked at the electromagnetic connection between the earth and humans and noted that by doing simple grounding practices, in these cases, they're generally, the studies have been done with grounding mats, which you actually plug into the wall, just like you would ground an appliance. You can actually ground yourself as a person because we're bioelectromagnetic in nature. So they've done these studies with grounding mats, grounding shoes, and found that when people ground themselves to the earth in this way, we see reductions in inflammation, reductions in pain, improvements of sleep. So there's scientists doing work like that. And then there's scientists like me that really study the subtle aspects, looking at energy healing practices. There are over 400 clinical studies of energy healing practices like Reiki, healing touch, therapeutic touch, laying on of hands, and others. And we come together to look at that data as a whole and say, what can we learn about these healing practices and their effects on the body mind? And so we see from those studies that these energy healing practices have effects on trauma, have effects on anxiety, depression, fatigue, pain, behavioral symptoms of dementia, but even on the physical level, we see shifts. And, my studies have been randomized placebo-controlled trials, for example, looking at placebo effects very robustly and seeing if those account for the effects. What we're learning from these studies, and there are studies that our colleagues are doing too with animals and cells to just sort of bypass the whole human question about human placebo effects. And we can have a lively conversation about placebo if you want, Marianne. These energy healing practices, where we can't directly measure always the emanations of energy coming from a healer using what we know now from, we're trying, and then there are people that are exploring that. We can measure the impact, though, of those practices in very rigorously controlled trials. And we see effects all the way down to cell signaling in the body, to reductions in tumor spread in mice, for example, and even reductions in tumor size in these animal studies, reductions of inflammatory cytokines related to tumor spread and migration. It's really incredible, again. And I'm so shocked, honestly, that most people don't know about this peer-reviewed, published research that is being conducted by stellar scientists at major universities and cancer centers. This is why I wrote the book, because I want people to know, of course, I've done my own studies, but what we need to do now is become aware of the growing body of evidence behind the impact of human consciousness on healing, how very real it is. That, these peer-reviewed published studies are starting to lead the way. There's much more research to be done. There's a lot of support that we need to give to these scientists and healing practitioners to uncover these mysteries and really help reduce the suffering that we see in so many patients. And, Marianne, that in my book, I talk about, for example, the story of Mira, who was a young child diagnosed with a brain tumor at age 2. And through her work with an energy healer, although the doctors had completely given up on her, she's now still living today and thriving, not just living today. And of course, when the doctors found out that her tumor had completely shrunk after working with this energy healer, they literally threw up their hands and said, we don't understand this. It's a miracle. We're not adverse to believing in miracle, but this is a miracle. We have no explanation for how this happened. This was after they were told that Mira worked with an energy healer. So we have an obligation when we invest in science to not just throw up our hands and say this is a miracle, but say what happened? How can we understand this scientifically so that we can make these so-called miracles more commonplace for our patients?
Yeah, I was really touched by that story. And I think a lot of people go through that where medical, modern medicine, and of course we always, say, of course, visit with your doctors and what have you. But when they get to the point where they're like, hey, there's nothing we can do. I mean, alternative medicine really is something I think a lot of people should look at.
Yeah, and the question is why we call it alternative. So, Marianne, I just finished giving my second TEDx talk. I spoke at TEDx Berkeley this April, and the link for that hopefully will be coming out soon. But one of the things that I addressed was, why do we still call this alternative? It's actually based on a cultural framework that is really based in what we might call a monocultural ethnocentrism. Well, what does that mean? We call these holistic practices alternative as opposed to mainstream because we've adopted one way of looking at the mind body through, let's say, the allopathic model, which has actually not been around that long when you compare it with the indigenous forms of healing. All of the indigenous forms of medicine have actually been around for thousands of years, but they've been largely ignored by mainstream medicine because it's been more dictated by a culture and a viewpoint that is rooted in reductionism, meaning that all that exists is the physical body, and pathogenesis, which means we're going to focus on disease as opposed to the healing response. Now, what's interesting is if you look globally, you'll see that all of these indigenous forms of medicine not only have been around for thousands of years, but all have a very similar cosmology that says consciousness is not an epiphenomenon. And healing is not just getting rid of a disease. Healing is about the restoration of harmony within us and between us and with our earth. But what we've tended to do in the Western world is sort of wave away that as saying, oh, that's nice. And that's great sentiment. And that's really, that's new agey, or these sorts of terms. But when you actually look at the science, you realize that those cosmologies explain a lot of the data that we've been struggling with today. So now in the Western world, we'll have these fancy tools like systems biology. And there's some really interesting studies that have been done that have related, for example, systems biology outcomes like metabolomics, where we're looking at the whole gamut of the metabolites in the body and sort of looking at those interconnections of what metabolites in our body might be expressed. And they have linked those metabolomic profiles of patients, for example, in rheumatoid arthritis, with the ancient phenotypic understandings of things like constitutions, right, in Chinese medicine. So there are linkages between the way we do science in the Western world and what the Eastern perspectives have been saying, not just Eastern, but, all native perspectives, South American, African, all over the world. They were looking at this from a systems point of view all along. But because we sort of waved that away, and I mentioned in my TEDx talk, I actually had a professor wave away things like Ayurveda and call them primitive medicine. Okay. They literally just waved away these forms of medicine as unimportant and primitive, as opposed to actually trying to learn from them. So the question of whether this is alternative is really, an interesting question, I think. Why do we call these medicines alternative? Why isn't allopathic medicine alternative? And I will say that I just want to clarify that I have nothing against allopathic medicine. A lot of our colleagues like to use the term integrative health or integrative medicine to say, let's look at all the pieces. There's certainly a place for allopathic medicine, I feel, with many, many patients. But we don't have to keep having these camps. We need to put all the data together.
Well, thank you for explaining that, because it is so important how that all comes together. It kind of seems like they leave the spiritual aspect just kind of behind. They just want to deal with parts of the body. I don't think do you feel like the medical community is ready to make some type of shift and treat the person as a whole?
I do. At least the physicians that I talk to, and even some of the administrators. And let me tell you why, because our current approaches aren't solving our global health crisis. So even before the pandemic, we knew we had a massive mental health crisis. We know we have a massive chronic disease crisis that includes chronic pain, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease. Our current methods are not solving the issue because we're not getting to the root issues of the problem. And these indigenous forms of medicine, which incorporated the spirit and the connection of our health with our environment, our relationships, what we eat, how we think, how we feel, that's whole person medicine, right? And our colleagues now are realizing that there's real value to us looking at the whole person, because science shows us that our connections matter for our health, that our mindset matters for our health, that our emotional state matters for our health, that the foods we eat matter for our health. So I don't think there's too much debate about that at this point. It's just a question of how do we learn from all of the different practitioners that are specializing in these areas, including psychologists, mental health providers, Chinese medicine doctors, energy healers, right? How do we come together to create a situation where you're a patient, you come in to see your doctor, and they're going to do a whole person assessment with you. They're not just going to ask you about your symptoms. They're going to ask you, how's your family life? How's your work environment? What kinds of foods are you eating? A lot of them now are asking, thank goodness, are you exercising? All of these things. So we get to those, we're moving toward hopefully a whole person assessment that could be done in the doctor's office. I mean, that's clearly a very easy, tangible goal. And then recommendations, right? And multidisciplinary guidance, so that our patients and all of us feel very supported in our healing journey. So at the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, which I mentioned is our nonprofit, we bring together scientists, healing practitioners, educators, and artists to help lead humanity to heal ourselves. And we recognize there's two main ways of doing this. One is to incorporate these whole person healing practices into healthcare. And the other is to help educate all of us so that we can incorporate it into our self-care. Because, truly the best thing that can happen is that we learn about what are the best things I can do to flourish and actually prevent disease from happening before it begins. And I think that's the power of whole person health, actually, is for us to take an internal assessment, right? And say, where am I at in all of these aspects of my health and wellness? And where could I work a little bit more strongly to bring balance to my system? There's a tremendous amount that we can do, whether we have a medical diagnosis or not, to foster our health. And that's where I'm really excited about all the empowering research that's going on too, because ultimately, all this research is leading us to the power of our own consciousness to help heal ourselves and others.
Oh, that is so exciting. I love hearing that. And you touched on about placebos. I'd love for you to dive into that, the research that you've done on that.
You bet, Marianne. And as you know, in the book, I have a whole chapter that I call Placebo Equals Heal, HEAL. And that's just my own little term. I call it that because heal actually stands for holistic elements that activate life force. And life force is, I guess you can say, a little poetic here. But what they are is holistic elements that activate the force of healing, our own inner healing response. And here's why I say that. When we explore what placebo is telling us, and I detail all of this, as you know, my book has, I think, over 700 peer-reviewed published references, scientific articles to back up everything that I'm sharing about the data. We know that we see placebo effects not only in depression, profound effects in mental health like depression, but also with Parkinson's patients, where we see placebo effects down to neural firing levels in the brain. We see placebo effects in surgery, robust effects in surgery, where patients can be told that they're getting surgery, but not actually get a surgery, just get an incision and think that they're getting surgery. These are randomized controlled trials that have been done and systematic reviews compiling all this data. And they get better. Their functional outcomes are better. Their pain ratings are better. Their quality of life is better. And here's what's also fascinating about the research. Our colleagues at Harvard in particular, but also other colleagues, have been doing research in what they call open label placebo. And what that means is they're not even tricking patients. They're telling them that they're getting a placebo. So they've done these studies with chronic pain, with cancer-related fatigue, and other things. And what they found is they can tell patients, you're getting a placebo. I'm giving you a placebo pill. And placebo has actually been shown in numerous studies to have a positive effect on things like pain and quality of life because it has a mind-body effect. So placebo is activating your mind-body response. Well, guess what? In these open label placebo studies, they're actually seeing beneficial outcomes when patients are given a placebo and told they're getting a placebo. So then you have to step back and say, what is going on? And we break it down even further, and we learn that what we call placebo is actually made up of many different elements, holistic elements, you can say. And those include things like expectation, that is how much I'm expecting that whatever medicine I'm taking, whether it's energy healing or a pill, is going to help me. Conditioning, which is just sort of the mind-body learning system. And that's something like, let's say I've gotten a massage before and I had a really good experience. The chances are the next time I just get on that massage table, even before I have the massage, my body mind is going to start moving into a relaxation response because it has a memory of having a positive experience last time. That's conditioning. So that plays a role. Relationship plays a huge role. We see a number of studies that show that when our doctors respond to us positively and believe that we're going to get better and they're more friendly to us, our recovery from even things like the common cold will actually improve and speed up. Relationship plays a huge role in our healing. And so does ritual. And we see ritual in everything. Whether we go to the doctor's office, check into the front desk, doctor with a white coat comes in, a nurse comes in to take our vitals, that's all ritual. So are, rituals and indigenous healing practices where we might light sage or incense or pray, different things. Those are all rituals. They set the tone for our body mind to open to a healing response. So in my book, the third part of my book is called The Healing Keys. And what I've done is I've distilled down what we've learned from placebo, mind-body science, and practices like meditation and energy healing to say, with all of this stuff that we've learned, how can I actually make that actionable for myself every day? So I kind of give a step-by-step process, which I call the healing keys. It's part 3 of the book. So for those that are kind of interested in the science, but really interested in what to do, you want to go to part 3 because that's where we really outline really key steps. We don't have to be adept meditators. We don't have to be bona fide energy healers in order to take advantage of what we know. It's very super simple. We just have to dedicate a little bit of time to our own healing every day. And this can be as little as 15 minutes to start with, if that's what we have. We start with where we are, but if we just help to create a little bit of structure and process, we'll see those gains. I mean, I've had people reach out to me and say, I started creating my healing ritual based on what you explained in the book, and I'm seeing such a difference already. And they've created little healing spaces in their offices, like wherever they can, right? And just engaged in those 15-minute practices, they can make such a difference.
That's so encouraging to hear that. And I love how in your book you talk about like emotional energy. And it was really fascinating to me that when you talk about positive and negative energy, emotions, how there's really no difference.
Yeah, there really isn't. And this is challenging, I think, for many people to consider because, a lot of questions I get too is like, well, how do I slough off the negative emotional energy of other people? And, and I mean, that's a legitimate question. And there is such a thing as emotional contagion. And we do feel the emotions of others. But when we look at it from an energy point of view, we realize that what's actually happening is we're feeling our own energy and the energy of others. And then we have kind of a cognitive overlay of what that energy is. We interpret it in a certain way. And when the mind gets involved to interpret the energy in a certain way, what's interesting is we have a tendency to hold on to it. Because if we look at things from an energy point of view, energy is constantly moving, actually. And an easy way to think about this, I think, is we can talk about it from a psychological point of view. And I think a lot of listeners can relate to this. Let's say something happens. Somebody says something to us and we get, quote, triggered, right? And we start thinking about it. We might even ruminate about, I can't believe this person said that thing to me. And, how could they say that? I'm so upset. We start thinking about it, rehearsing it over and over. Well, I could have said this. And, all this stuff comes up, right? But what just happened? We got triggered because something in our body mind actually got triggered because we've had some kind of experience that relates to what that person has said. I just did a talk on unconscious bias, for example, and, there's a lot of that going on. Obviously, there's a lot of overt bias going on, but there's also a lot of unconscious bias that leads to, terrible things happening in the world, like, this recent shooting that just happened in Buffalo, for example. We're human. We're going to get triggered by the nature of us being human. We have conditioned responses. That is based on what we've experienced. We're going to hold on to things sometimes in the body mind. We can describe this in brain terms. We can describe this in energetic terms. There are many different ways to describe what we call our conditioned responses. That's fine. We're human. But when we engage in some of these meditative and other mind-body practices, we're better able to cultivate an observation so that, for example, if somebody says something to us, we can say, oh, okay. All right, now I'm recognizing I just took that in, and here's how I'm responding. Why am I responding this way? Because I've been hurt by people saying things like this to me in the past, let's say. And I can watch that happen, and I can actually watch the energy move when I cultivate that observer in me. Now, who is that observer? That observer is actually my spirit. And so this is where I think we've been missing the boat a lot in modern medicine, when we just have thought like the spirit is unimportant, or we don't want to deal with talking about it or whatever. Because mindfulness and yoga and Tai Chi and all of these practices have taught us to cultivate that observer, to come into our spirit. And all the healing practitioners will say that's where the magic actually happens. Because once we align with something that's beyond just our conditioned mind, we can more skillfully navigate emotional energy, and we can have a more appropriate response to a situation. We might even look at that person that we feel like triggered us, that is so awful or whatever. And we might say, what are the causes and conditions that made that person say that to me? What have they experienced in their life, right? How do we have the reserves to be able to even cultivate that observer? We have to align with our spirit. And that's what all these holistic practices do for us. They help us more align with our spirit. So we're just not a walking set of actions and reactions all the time.
Thank goodness for that, right?
Right. It's a beautiful thing, right? That we're not just that. We can honor our experiences and know that we're even more than our conditioned minds.
Mm-hmm. I know in your book you talk about the awareness practice. Is this what that kind of comes into play?
Absolutely. And there's so many, I give simple practices in my book, like none of this needs to be trademarked or sold, really, right? It's so present in every single culture and spiritual tradition. But there's simple practices that we can do. And so coming into awareness, we can literally start with the breath. It's really that simple. It's just cultivating the observer. As it turns out, many traditions like Vipassana, where mindfulness in the West has really drawn a lot of its inspiration from, and others, by just simply starting with a cultivation of awareness of breath inside the body, we can help release the machinations of the mind. And, when we start this, it doesn't necessarily mean that our mind stops. So sometimes people say, oh, well, I don't know if I did this right. My mind was still going. Oh, you did it right, because you noticed your mind was going. And, the mind, that's the nature of the mind. It's going to go. But awareness means we're aware of that. And we're aware of our breath. And we're aware of our body. And we might become more aware of sounds. We just become more aware of the greater totality of the universe and our place in it. It's such a beautiful thing. And there's so many awareness practices. So, I give some tips and pointers for how we can do this, how it relates to energy and sort of breathing through difficult emotions. They're very, very simple things we can do by just learning how to connect with the energy of the breath, leading it into the body, feeling those places of stagnation, and just gently breathing into it and allowing for that emotional energy to release through the body. So, that's a practice that I find useful. And I've drawn that from my work with working with a really renowned healer, Reverend Rosalind Bruyere, who has just been a phenomenal teacher for decades. She's a master of healing. She's written a book too called Wheels of Light, which I highly recommend. So much of the practices that I share have been drawn from inspiration from her, as well as my practice in meditation and my exploration into tantric philosophy and practice, where we really explore the energetic components of our being and how that can relate to our whole person health.
That sounds so exciting, because it's really kind of diving in. I think a lot of times people have been kind of craving that.
Yeah, because we're craving to be with our spirit, right? And I think we're craving to connect spirit to spirit. And this is, if we kind of take a broader view and look at what's happening in our times, there's a lot of division, there's a lot of violence, there's a tendency to engage in either or thinking, whether it's about medicine or politics or religion. And this is sort of the human test of our times, which is, can we actually step inside our larger selves individually and collectively and notice that we're part of a larger whole? From the tantric perspective, we describe what we call, sometimes I call the big B biofield, Shakti, which is, considered to be the manifest power behind the whole universe. And, I understand that I'm sort of throwing some terms around that some folks might not be familiar with yet, but Shakti is considered to be sort of the energy that drives everything, that creates and sustains all life. And I love this perspective because when I think about it that way, I say, I can look at that tree or that bird or that person or that animal and see them all as this beautiful expression of consciousness and energy in form. And I can just observe them and learn so much and revel in the beauty of that being and know that they're part of the same fabric of energy and consciousness that I'm part of. I mean, it's like a beautiful thing, right? We're just all these beautiful threads that weave together in this gorgeous tapestry of consciousness. And I think it's not even a challenge. It's actually the beautiful gift that we're being given, because as we become more connected to our spirit, we start seeing the spirit in everything and everybody. And then when we are able to do that, we're actually able to hold the space for the trauma to unleash itself and unwind itself, because we can't just bypass. We can't just say, oh, okay, we're all part of the same fabric of consciousness. If, we understand you've got problems, get over on them. No, like, there's, that's not going to happen, right? We have to actually be able to hold that space for the healing to happen on a personal and societal level, so that we really truly can come into that mutual respect and learn how to come into creating a world that fosters equity, not just equality, but also equity, right? For all. So, I know these are kind of big things, but you can see how this links together, because when we start exploring the power of the spirit, like we do with these studies, and we start learning about the power of coming into our own spirit, then our lives change. Our society changes, right? And we're in desperate need of societal transformation right now.
Oh boy, are we. I mean, it's just kind of, I feel in many ways we're kind of at that place where, they discovered the earth was round and there was a little bit of resistance and pushback to it, but, you can't argue with facts.
Well, no, you can't. And facts, are science, it's data, but I also want to encourage us all to be our own data gatherers, really cultivate that inner observer in us, and kind of watch and say, wait a minute, what happened? All of a sudden I'm in a bad mood. What just happened before the last hours before all of a sudden I became in a bad mood? And just sort of observe the trajectory of causes and conditions that lead us to how we are feeling in the moment. Because as we kind of cultivate our own inner scientist, we'll be able to create better self-prescriptions for our own health. And then when we do that, we can start doing that on a more massive scale with our societies. But it starts with us.
Yeah, really asking those questions, which has me asking you, what is the link between creativity and vitality?
Oh gosh, do we have another hour of time?
So, I put you on the hot seat. Sorry.
No, I love this. I'm so glad you asked, because I'm so passionate about that. I'm just so enthusiastic about this, because I often meet people that say, well, I'm not really creative. I used to play an instrument or draw, but I didn't really get to create space for that in my life. The data is actually clear. We're all creative beings. And by the very nature of us being alive, we are embodiments of creative energy. Okay, that's the spiritual perspective. And the scientific perspective shows us that even when we engage in everyday creativity, it doesn't have to be writing an entire symphony or even painting a whole painting or writing a book. If we engage in everyday creativity, which can include things like cooking a cool meal or journaling or simply singing while we're cooking or dancing around the house, that will actually up-level our mood and improve certain aspects of our immunity and, again, our hormone system, because all these things are connected. So by increasing our abilities to give ourselves space to allow creativity to come through us, we will see healing effects. And this is a lot of the work that I do in my in-person workshops. I have a couple coming up in June. We're doing this beautiful event in Sedona with my dear friends, Greg Braden and Anita Morjani and Bruce Lipton and myself. We're going to be engaging in a lot of fun creative practices as well as other things. I'm also teaching at Esalen Institute in Big Sur in July, because when we get to come together in creative community, it's amazing. We do these really fun exercises where we'll get together and just sort of flow together in ways that people at first are like, oh, I can't do that. And then all of a sudden they're like spitting out poetry and they didn't realize they could do it. I mean, it's really amazing to witness the transformation that happens for folks. So I encourage everybody, if you consider yourself a creative person, bravo, and just make sure that you're making space for that. Even just, again, 15, 20 minutes a day, if you can, sing in the car, do whatever you can. And if you haven't considered yourself a creative person, I'd like you to reconsider that and then explore what you might be interested in doing creatively, whether it's something you did before or maybe something totally new. Maybe you want to take a sculpture class or, just create mosaics or collages or whatever. Just allow that space for yourself, because the data is pretty clear. If you engage in creativity every day, you will up-level your health.
I appreciate you sharing that, because a lot of times I kind of got from your book is sometimes it's about community as well. Being in right community helps us kind of get to the place we want to be.
It really does. And as a psychologist, I don't know if I mentioned to you, but I'm a clinical psychologist. We sometimes laugh because if you really look at a lot of the data for psychotherapy and even things like mindfulness, and you look really hard at the data, you realize that while some of these therapies and mind-body practices are very powerful, when you compare them with social support groups, there's no difference. Which, again, doesn't mean that they don't work. It means that social support is just as powerful. So coming together in groups and sharing is incredibly powerful. And of course, that's a biofield effect as well, because we're all amplifying our energy for change.
What do you want people to take away from your book, Healing Ourselves?
The most important thing is to know, and especially for patients, I want all of us to know that, first of all, there is hope, that we are evolving our understandings in science and medicine, and that we do need to invest in the healing research. It's very important. These people are not getting the research dollars they need to carry out the work. And so the research needs to be supported. So as a messenger of that field, I want people to know that and know how real the data is. And then I want us to all take in that data and recognize how much hope there is for us and our world, that all of this work and everything that these spiritual healers are telling us is how powerful we are to create the changes that we want to see in ourselves and our families and in our societies. And so I want us to really rest in that joy, because right now there's a lot of news and information that makes us feel despondent, right? And rightfully so. There's some things we need to deal with. But we do have the inner reserves and the collective reserves to create the world we want to see, because the research shows us that we truly are conscious creators.
Well, Shamini, where can our listeners connect with you, learn more about your work and all these great events you have coming up?
You bet. So I'll suggest two main websites, the easiest ways to connect. And I'm just going to say the ones that are easy to remember. Go to healingourselvesbook.com. Healingourselvesbook.com will take you to the page of my website where you'll learn more about the book and testimonials, and also be able to claim a lot of really cool free bonuses, including meditations, interviews, free ebooks on Biofield devices. So if you're interested in the book, go to healingourselvesbook.com. But that also takes you to my website, so you can play around there. There's lots of free resources. There's, talks and workshops, so you can see all the places virtually and in person that I'll be sharing and teaching. I'd love to connect. And then go to webinarsonhealing.com. Webinarsonhealing.com will take you to our nonprofit website, the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. And we have free webinars on healing every month with leading lights. So coming up in June is Greg Braden On the first Friday of every month, generally, we have live dialogues with these master teachers, healers, and scientists to share with us what they've learned about healing. And it's totally free. And it's a great resource and a wonderful way to connect with people. So please do go to webinarsonhealing.com to get connected in with the Chi community.
Well, Shamini, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you, Marianne. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time, and thanks everyone for listening.
Well, thank you, Dr. Shamini Jain. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Healing Ourselves, Biofield Science and the Future of Health. Healing Ourselves is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and everywhere books are sold. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, support our indie bookstores. Make sure to visit Dr. Shamini Jain's website at Shamini, spelled SHAMINI, Jain, JAIN.com for more information. There you can sign up for her newsletter, learn more about her book, which she's got some amazing resources there. I've signed up and highly suggest you do as well, and also her upcoming events. To reach her consciousness community Chi, visit chi.is for more information. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.